Just what we are. Today's daf in Masechet Bava Kamma is Pei Zayin, Paz, 87, and we are at the last line of Pei Vav Amud Bet. And the halacha we said yesterday, which was a very interesting halacha, which is, first of all, our Mishnah was talking about busha, right, where you embarrass a person. And the Mishnah said a very unusual halacha that if you embarrass a person who's blind, you have to pay. But a blind person who embarrasses, we said in the Gemara, well, actually Rabbi Yehuda said, a blind person is not part of Boshet, meaning that if they embarrass someone else, they don't pay. And if someone embarrasses them, that person doesn't have to pay. And we learned it from a pasuk that we compared it to Ritzicha, and there was a special, from Edom Zomimim, and then from Edom Zomim we compared Ritzicha, and we went through a list of things that a blind person is not considered to be part of because they're all connected, and it included testimony, which is obvious because they can't see. It included Ritzicha, it included Galut, included all kinds of things. Says the Gemara, and Malkut as well. Says the Gemara today at the bottom line of Daf Pei Vav Amud Bet, Tanya Idach, there's another Braita which says this explicitly. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Suma Ein Lo Boshet. Rabbi Yehuda says, which is what we quoted we said our Mishnah is not going like him, because Rabbi Yehuda, the Tana, holds that a blind person does not fall into the category of where the Torah required or allowed or made someone pay for Boshet. And the top line of now of Pei Zayin Amud Aleph, V'chein haya Rabbi Yehuda poter mikol dinim shebetorah. In fact, Rabbi Yehuda said that a blind person is patur from all judgments in the Torah. It's a lot of debate about how far to take this. We'll keep going. Why? My time in Rabbi Yehuda. Because on my the pasuk says v'shaftu ha'eda, that the eda, meaning the judges, the Beit Din, judges bein hamakeh ubein goel hadam, between the one who killed someone. Remember, this is a case where you kill by mistake, and the goel hadam is the family that has a right to come and attack you and kill you if you don't run to a ir hanidachat. So the pasuk says that the eda judges between the makeh, the one who caused the death, and the goel hadam al hamishpatim ha'ela. It adds the word mishpatim. Now, what does mishpatim have to do with anything? What rules have to do with that? And what we learn from there, says Rabbi Yehuda, is kol sheyashnu b'makah u'b'gel hadam. Anyone who falls into the category of you're not allowed to kill a person and you have to run away if you do, which we said does not apply to a blind person, then that person is yashnu b'mishpatim. They have all the other rules of the Torah, or all the other judgments of the Torah. Kol she'eino b'makeh u'b'gel hadam eino b'mishpatim. So that is one statement of Rabbi Yehuda. Continues the Gemara 6 lines from the top. Tanya Idach, there's another Braita from Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Suma Ein Lo Boshat. Rabbi Yehuda says, again, this is a repetition, a Suma does not fall into the category of people who have to pay or are paid if they are embarrassed or cause embarrassment. V'chein haya Rabbi Yehuda potro mikol mitzvot hamurot b'Torah. Here it's even more general, that a Suma is potter from all mitzvot that it says in the Torah. Tosfos is bothered by what we mean by this. Doesn't mean all mitzvot lo taseh, doesn't doraita, dorabanan, but that's what Rabbi Yehuda says. And the reason for that is Amar Shesh B'Rei Ravida, my time in Rabbi Yehuda, because Amar Kra, there's also a very interesting pasuk that says ve'ela hamitzvot hachukim v'hamishpatim. It puts together, right, these are the mitzvot, the chukim and the mishpatim. It's the exact pasuk is Zot, it doesn't actually say Zot Ela Mitzvot. It says Zot HaMitzvah. It says the singular. There's the mitzvah, chukim HaMishpatim. That's the real Gersa. So these are, that Moshe says, right? These are the mitzvah, the chukim, and the mishpatim. And it's telling you that those things all go together. Kol sheyashnu b'mishpatim. If you have judgments, right? Meaning if you're liable to being sued and to being paying monetary things, then yashnu b'mitzvot u'b'chukim. But if you're not, this does not apply to you. So a lot of uncertainty as to whether we paskin this way, whether in fact a blind person is chayav in mitzvot, and of course has huge implications from, all kinds of, can they be motzi other people, what do they have to do, etc. Amar Rav Yosef. Now Rav Yosef said, remember Rav Yosef was blind, as we've quoted many times before. And Rav Yosef said, Mereish, originally, Reish means in the beginning, Hava Amina, I used to say, Hava means I would say, the Man Amar Alachak Rabbi Yehuda, anyone who said that, in fact, we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, who says, Amar Suma Patur Min HaMitzvot, if he came and told me basically that Rav Yosef doesn't have to really do mitzvot, I would have celebrated. Kavidna Yuma Tuva Rabbanan. I would have made a big party for my friends in yeshiva, my time. And why would that have made me so happy? Not so I could go out and get a cheeseburger, but the lo mafkedina, because it means that I'm not commanded to do mitzvot as a blind person, the ka'avidna mitzvot, and I'm doing the mitzvot. So I get even, I'm even better because I don't have to do it, and I'm doing it just the same. V'hashta, but then he heard Shammit Lad Rabbi Chanina. He heard Rabbi Chanina said, Rabbi Chanina, in fact, it's not the right logic, because Gadol HaMitzuveva oseh, it's greater if you're commanded to do something and do it. It's even better than someone who does it without being commanded, because you're not only doing the mitzvah, but you're actually responding to a command. And so there's a greater reward if you are in fact chayiv in the mitzvah. Not that you can't do it and don't get reward otherwise, but it's greater. And so once I heard that, so now, says Rav Yosef, I hope I am chayiv in mitzvot because I'm doing them. So now, Manda Amarli Ein Halacha Reb Yehuda. If someone came and said that we don't pass like Reb Yehuda and a blind person has to do mitzvot, then Avinna Yumatuv Rabbanan, I would then make a holiday. My taima dechi mafkedina itli agrotve, because according to that opinion of Rabbi Chanina, when you are commanded to do a mitzvah, you get more reward for fulfilling it, and therefore I hope that I am chayiv in mitzvot. And of course, it sounds like he doesn't really know who we paskin like. Okay, that is the end of that question.
Does that apply to only to congenital blindness, or would that apply to, the whole discussion, would that apply to someone who becomes blind with age due to macular degeneration or whatever it might be?
It's a really good question. So presumably, again, I don't want to say anything halachically because I don't know for sure, but remember the way we derived it yesterday was from testimony, right? And so if you can't see, you can't give testimony. So presumably it would apply even to one who became blind at later in life. Once they become blind, they fall out of the category of testimony. And by Gzeir Shava that we quoted yesterday, out of Ritzicha and out of Goel Adam and out of Galut and all of that. But again, this is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Not everyone agrees with that. So you can't just go around, if you're blind, going against all the mitzvot, just to be clear. Don't make that mistake. Says the Mishnah. But to be honest with you, people talk about it very practically, right? Let's say a blind person wants to be a Baal Koreh in shul or something. You know what I mean? Not a Baal Koreh, a Baal Tefillah, right? Obviously, you can't read the Torah if you're blind, but can you get up there and do tefillah if you memorized it, which obviously certainly many people have. But if the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda and you're not chayiv in mitzvot, then maybe you can't do it for other people. So that kind of question comes up. I'm not exactly sure how makbid we are or paskin that way. Continues the Mishnah. That's the end of what Adam is chayav. Nezek, tsar, shevet, ripoy, and boshet. Says the Mishnah, let's combine it all together. Zeh chomer ba'adam mi b'shar. Right? Remember, if a shar causes damage, you have to pay certain things. You don't pay nezek, tsar, shevet, ripoy, and boshet, right? If an adam damages, you do. So this is one of the ways in which an adam causing damage is more chamor than my animal causing damage. Sha'adam mishalem nezek, tsar, ripoy, shevet, boshet. You got to pay all 5 of these things. And furthermore, mishalem demei vladot, you have to pay the value of, let's say you hurt someone or hurt an animal and it miscarries, you have to pay the value of that. But a shar, eino mishalem el nezek, you only pay damage, not the rest of the things. And even a shar that hurts a person, right? You don't pay, you might kill the shar, but you don't pay anything else. Upatur mi demei vladot, and you don't have to pay demei vladot, and that's something we've discussed before and we'll continue to discuss. Continues the Mishnah, we had this yesterday. Hamaket aviv et imo, if a person hits their mother or father, which is a capital punishment, but lo asa behen chabura, but you didn't make a wound, and if you don't make a wound, remember, it's not chayiv mita. So then remember we talked yesterday, maybe you cut off their hair, or you did something that was permanent, but didn't cause a wound. Then, or chovel b'chaver b'yom kippurim, or if you damage someone on Yom Kippur, when on Yom Kippur, for making a chabura, you're chayiv karet, but not mita, and therefore, in this Mishnah, chayav b'kulan, you have to then pay nezek, tsar, shevet, ripoy, and boshet, because what you did was not a capital punishment, right? The hachovel be'eved ivri, now continues our Mishnah, if you damage a Jewish slave, we'll see all the cases here, then you're chayav b'kulan. Right, a Jew who sold themselves, they're impoverished, right? They stole or whatever, and they had to sell themselves to another Jew. And you then damage that person, you have to pay all the things, nezek, tsar, shevet, ripoy, and boshet. Chutz min hashevet. Except you don't have to pay shevet, meaning shevet is the payment for not working during the time that he's hospitalized or sick. And that is bisman shelo, if you own the eved, right? Because if you own the eved, then his work or her work is for you. So the fact that you canceled her ability to do his or her ability to do work is just costing yourself money. So you don't have to pay that. But the rest of the payments, you have to actually pay the eved or the amma herself, him or herself, because that's not included in your ownership. But if you're chovel be'eved Kanani, now if it's not a Jewish slave, it's an eved Kanani and you wound them, if it's shalachirim, if it belongs to somebody else, then you have to pay all of things. Chayav b'kulan, you got to pay everything, and you pay it to the owner, right? But Rabbi Yehuda says, no, you don't pay boshet, ein la'avadim boshet, that we don't consider there to be, we said this yesterday as well, we don't consider avadim to be subject to boshet because they're not viewed as people, I'll say. I mean, it's not exactly the reason, but you're not viewed as being boshet. Now, when you start talking about people who are not personally responsible, right? A person who's deaf, which again in the Gemara meant deaf, mute, and not intelligent, not able to communicate or do things, a shoteh, who's mentally challenged or limited, and a katan, a minor. All of these people, p'giyatan ra, any interaction with them is bad news, right? Because hachovel behen chayav, if you harm them, you have to pay. Now, we talked yesterday, maybe there's no busha, but you have to pay in general. The haim shechavlu b'achirim paturim. But if they punch you back, they don't have to pay, right? Because none of these people can be liable themselves. So you can't hold a katan liable, and you can't hold a chirish or a shoteh liable. So don't get into a fight with them, because if they, if you hurt them, you're going to have to pay. But if they hurt you, they're going to be patur. Ha'eved va'isha. Now the next case is an eved, a slave, which is an eved Kanani in this case, and an isha, a woman who's a regular Jew. Pigiatan ra'ah. That's also a unfortunate interaction because hachovel be'em chayav. If you damage them, you have to pay, as we just said in the Mishnah. But heim shechavlu b'achirim piturim. A woman, a Jewish woman, or a slave that hurts somebody is patur from paying. Now, why are they patur from paying? Not because they're really patur, but because they have no money that's their own, right? So because they don't have any of their own possessions, there's no way to collect from them. However, says the Mishnah, aval mishamin la'achar zman. They have a debt, and at some point, when they get money, if they ever get money, they'll have to pay, right? So if a woman, let's say, hurts a man or a woman, doesn't matter who, and they are chayav nezek, they don't have any money to pay the nezek. Their husband doesn't have to pay it for them, but they have a debt. And nitgarsha ha'isha, if a woman gets divorced, so she then has her own money, and she's not married, nishtachrer eved, or the eved gets freed, then chayavim l'shalem, then they'd have to pay the debt. But still, of course, you never know if that's going to happen, and it might be many years. And so again, don't get into fights, the Mishnah says, with avadim or nashim. Hamakeh aviv v'imo. Now, the flip side of the earlier case of the Mishnah is if you hit your mother or father and you make a chabura, v'asaba and chabura, in which case you're chayiv mita, right? You're chayiv death for that. Or if you're chovel b'chavro b'Shabbat, or you punch someone and cause a wound to grow on Shabbat, which is also a capital punishment on Shabbat, then you don't pay any money because patur mikulan, you're patur from all the levels of payment. Because you're guilty for your soul. And the halacha is that you never do both, right? If you're chayiv to be killed, you don't also pay money. And finally, says our Mishnah, chovel be'eved Kanani shelo, if you damage your own eved Kanani, then you are patur mikulan, then you don't have to pay anything, because as we said earlier, you would have paid the owner of the eved Kanani, and of course you're the owner. So you pay, you don't pay, or you could pay, you pay yourself. Remember, there are cases where the eved goes free if you cause certain damages, Roshei Evarim, right? But outside of that, you would be patur. So that's the Mishnah, long Mishnah. Says the Gemara, 5 lines from the bottom. Ba minei Rabbi Elazar mirav. Rabbi Elazar asked Rav the following question: what if you are? Remember, our Mishnah talked about katan. Our Mishnah talked about slaves, eved Kanani, eved Ivri. What about a person's daughter who's a minor? So remember that a father has very unique rights in his daughters, as the pasuk talks about, when she makes a neder, right? Remember, a daughter makes a neder, the father can cancel it as long as she's a minor, because the pasuk says, "Binureha beit avia," right? In her na'arut, in her childhood, she's in the possession or in the control or under the authority of her father. And a father, as we learned in Kiddushin very explicitly, a father is allowed to sell his daughter as an amma ivriya, as long as she's a minor, right? Until she turns 12. So a father basically has control over his daughter. And so ask the Gemara, what if, let's say a person damages, causes a wound, right? To a woman who's a minor. So if she's an adult, we assume the money goes to her, right? But if she's a minor and she's not your kid, which we'll see why that matters in a second, who do you pay? You have to pay, right? Like if you damage any child. But who do you give the money to? Do you give it to the girl, right? The woman herself, or do you give it to her father? So it says, who does the wound, who does the money for the wound go to? Mi amrina, do you say, Kivan da'akni le'rachmana shevet nu'urim la'av? Right? Since the Torah said that a father basically gets the value, we call it, of his daughter, meaning he can sell her as an Amma Ivriya, and then he gets the money. Or remember, if a father marries off his daughter, he keeps the Kesef Kiddushin, right? He keeps the everything. So therefore, he sort of has rights to all her monetary things, and therefore, Chavala Nami Davu Ahavi. And then you would say, okay, so if she gets wounded and someone pays her, he gets to keep it. And my timer, why would you say that? Mikaspa, right? Because it is basically reduced. He used to be able, not that he necessarily wanted to, but he used to be able to take his daughter and sell her as an Amma Ivriya. Now that she's wounded, her arm's not working, she has less value, right? So it's basically cost him potential that he was allowed to use. So therefore you should pay him. Odilmar, do you say, no, that's not the case at all. Right, the Torah is very explicit that if a father can marry off his daughter, sure, but just because he can marry off his daughter and keep the money does not mean that he owns everything about her, right? Or do you say, 2 lines on the bottom now, Shevach nu'urimu da'akni rachmana, the Torah gave you the value of marrying her off, basically, the boy, the mimsar la mukashchin matzi masar, he can marry her off to anyone he wants, even someone who might be a mukashchen, meaning he has wounds and he is very undesirable and therefore might give a high amount for marriage, right? The father can do that if he wants to, or if he, I don't know, if he needs to. Aval chavala, but a wound, even right? A father obviously cannot hurt his daughter, right? So he's not allowed to cause, you can't hurt your child, you can't cause a wound in them. So he can marry her off, and since he has the right to marry off to whoever he wants, when she gets married off, he keeps that money. But in a wound situation, in an injury, you're not allowed to injure your child. So you can't say, oh, I could have injured her myself. Like there's no equivalent. So therefore, would you say, lo kanyale rachmana, the Torah did not give him the money that she should be paid when she's injured. So that was the question that they asked Rav. Turn the page to Daf Pei Zayin Amabet. Amrile, Rav said, of course not. He doesn't get it. Lo zachta Torah la'av ela shevach nurim bovad. Torah said that a father gets, if he sells his daughter as an amma, or if he marries her off, he keeps the agreement. But he doesn't mean that if she gets injured, that he gets to keep everything that she would collect, even though he could say, the value that I could have gotten for her selling her as an amma is diminished. It's true. But since, as we just said in Amar Aleph, he can't actually do this to her, he couldn't injure her, so he's not allowed to do that, to injure anybody, and therefore he doesn't keep that money, she gets to keep it. Okay? So that is the specific question. Ask the Gemara at the top now, second line of Peizayin Amabet, Eitfe. We have a problem from a Breita. The Breita says the following: Hachovel be'eved ivri, if a person damages an eved ivri, chayav bikulan. Now, a person, again, if you remember, is a Jew for all purposes, right? He sold himself because he was in debt or because he had to sell himself. He had no way to support himself. His owner is also a Jew, and he's got to take care of him. If he hurts him, breaks his arm, says the Braita, chayav bekulan, you've got to pay that Eved Ivri, Nezek, Tsar, Ripoy, and Boshet, but you don't pay Shevet. Chutz min Shevet, min ha-Shevet, bizman shu shelo. You don't have to pay Shevet. Shevet, again, remember, Shevet means time that you couldn't work. But since he's working for his owner doesn't pay himself for the missed work. He just basically misses the work. So ask the Gemara and Rav. Rav just said that a minor daughter, you pay everything to her. But why isn't she like an Eved Ivri in this case? A minor daughter, any money she earns will go to her father. So therefore, why would he have to pay her Shevet for not working? Because if she had worked anyways, he would have kept it. Right? So I understand he pays Nezek, Tsar, Ripoy, and Boshet, but why does he pay her shevet. Amar Abaya says Abaya, no, of course. Mode Rav b'shevet. It's true. No, Rav wasn't saying that the father's to pay her the shevet, because shevet, again, is payment for her not working. But everything that she makes working would go to him anyways, right? Because anything she does with her hands, any work she does, ad shat bagrut, until she becomes mature, de'avu goes to her father. So of course, Rav wasn't saying about that. Rav was just saying everything beyond that. But certainly in regards to shevet, a father doesn't have to pay himself shevet. But a father does have to pay his daughter, put it into account for his daughter, any nezek, tsar, ripoy, and boshet, right? For damaging her. Eitve. Ask the Gemara now, 5 lines from the top. What about from the following Breita? The Breita talks about very interesting disparity between different genders here. Hachovel bibno gadol. A person wounds his mature son. Again, gadol means, above the age of maturity, 15, 13, right? Yitain lo miyad. You've got to pay the child, the kid, the nezek, sar, shevet, ripoy, and boshet right away. You give him a check, right? He's above the age. You cause damage. We said if a father damages their child, they got to pay. And so you've got to pay him right away. If you damage bibno katan, so now you damage your 10-year-old kid, so you have to pay, but you don't give the money to the kid because they're just going to go and buy candy with it. And so what you're supposed to do is yaseh lo sigula. You make for him, sigula is a funny terminology, and we'll see later a little bit why we use this, but sigula means something that's going to last, right? So you invest it in a, I don't know, a CD or something, some long-term thing. Mara's going to say you buy a tree for him, right? You plant a tree that's going to produce fruit. So you give the money though, but you invest it in a way that he'll get fruits from it in the future. Hachovel bibitok tanan, says the Breita, a third case, a person who damages his minor daughter, then you're patur, which goes against Rav, right? Remember, Rav said that a father has to pay. And continues the Breita, v'lo od, not only that, el achirim shechavlu ba, if somebody else damages a 10-year-old girl, chayavim litain le'avia, they got to pay all the damage to her father. So we now seem to be saying that a girl who's a minor is in the control of her father, and all the payments go to him. So that goes against Rav. Answers the Gemara, no, hachanami b'shevet. It's referring to just that specific thing of shevet, meaning Rav was saying that nezek, tsar, ripoy, and boshet all go to her. The one exception that makes a girl different than a boy is a shevet. I said shevet twice, but anyways, is shevet, right? So because any work that a girl does in the house that would go to the father, her not being able to work is his loss. And so he doesn't have to pay it himself. And if somebody else has to pay it because they injured her, they pay to the father. But Rav maintains that everything else, nezek, tsar, ripoy, and boshet, all go to her. And that's consistent with this Breita. So that's the Breita.
Continues. We said above that the father isn't allowed to injure his child because it would
definitely not allowed to. Well, when we say he's not allowed to, we mean obviously he's not allowed to, but no one's allowed to injure anybody, right? I mean, hopefully. But so we're saying if you did it anyways, you have to pay, even though you're not allowed to. But the point Rav was making is you can't say, oh, I could have done this myself, so you can't make me pay, right? Because you're not allowed to do it.
So he has to pay his own daughter, essentially.
So he has to pay his own daughter if he hurt. Absolutely.
Right. Okay.
And he pays his own son, right? So that would be the case. Continues the Gemara now. Don't go home yet because it's not so clear. Ubibno gadol yitain lo miyad. Is it true that you have to pay your child who's 20 if you injure them? Vermino, there's the following Breita which seems to argue with that. Because the Breita says, Hachovel b'banav u'benotav shel achirim. Let's say you damage somebody else's kids, right? You damage other people's children. Then Gidolim, if they're adults, meaning above the age of maturity, yitain lehem miyad. You pay them, the kid, right away. If they're ktanim, if they're minors, you have to pay them, but you don't give them the money, they're going to waste it. And yaseh lehem skula, you make an investment for them. But says the Breita now, b'banav u'benotav shelo, if they're your own kids, patur. You don't pay anything. That's pretty bizarre. Why would you not pay if you hurt your kid? Now, this is both adults and minors, we're saying, right? You don't have to pay them anything. That goes against what we just said. Answers the Gemara, that's a very specific case. Amri, lo kasha, there's no question, there's no contradiction between the Breitot, because kan kishetzomchin al shulchano, kan kishein samuchin al shulchano. it depends on whether they still live at home and eat your food. And the halacha is, that's really probably just about shevet, right? Just about the work, right? Not nezek, tzar, ripoy, and boshet. But the halacha is that as long as you're feeding them, they, even if they're adults, even if they're 50, to be honest, right? Adults could be anything above 13, you get a right to their income, right? That's the deal. As long as they're home and they stay on your table and you feed them, and again, they're smuchin al shulchano, then you get to keep any ma'aseh yadeha, just like you would with a daughter. And therefore, in that case, if they get injured, you don't collect, the father doesn't collect the shevet, right? And the reason he doesn't collect the shevet is because, he doesn't pay shevet because he doesn't have to pay it because he gets to keep any money that they were earning anyways. So this braita is referring to not like the first braita where the children are independent and therefore they keep their shevet. And if the father injures them, he's got to pay them. This case, the children are dependent on the father. And therefore, if he injures them, he's got to pay maybe the tsar and the nezik and all of that, but he's patur on paying shevet because he really gets to keep it himself anyways. So that's the difference between the two braita. Says the Gemara, 1 second. We are, I don't know how where we are exactly, like 14 or lines or so down in the middle of the narrow lines. So therefore, you're saying the second braita is where the kids are relying on the father for food. So therefore, the first braita has to be, where do you explain the first braita? The father's not feeding the children. They're they have a job, work in the restaurant, get their own money, get their own food, right? If that's the case, then look at what it said at the end of the first braita, which now we're saying is referring to a situation where the father does not support the kids, right? The braita said, "Hachovel bebito haktana," right? A person who damages his daughter, patur, and we said that was because since he gets to keep her food, her work, he doesn't have to pay for her missing work. V'lo od, says the braita, el achirim shechavlu ba chayavim litain le'avia. If the other people damage her, they give it to her father. Now, if you're talking about a case where the father doesn't feed her, then he shouldn't get a right to her money, right? So then lidida by lemeitavla, right? They should give her the money. Either the father should give it to her, the other people should give it to her. Dibai mizoni, because she needs the money, she needs her earnings to buy food, right? And that's the social contract. If you're not supplying food, then you can't take her earnings. Just like with the wife, it's the same thing, right? Says more now, there is an exception. The one exception might be an Eved Kanani, right? Afilu Laman Damar, there was a Manda Amar who said that by an Eved Kanani, Yachol Harav Lomer LeEved, the owner can say to his Eved, you know what? Asayimi, work for me all day long. I keep everything you make. Ve'eni Zanchan, I'm not giving you any food. Find your own food. Get a job at night, right? That's only Hanimi the Eved Kanani. That's only by a non-Jewish Eved. Why? Damarle, I don't know if this is why, but this is that he could say to him, Avid avidita kula yuma. Look, you work for me during the day, and I keep everything you make. Ula orta, and at night, zil sachar va'achol. You got to go do business and eat. Meaning, get another job. I don't have to. Support you necessarily. It's a machloket as we had before. But that, even if you hold of that extreme opinion, that by an Eved Kanani you can say to the Eved, I'm going to keep your work and you find your own, get your own job on the side to eat food. That's only true by an Eved Kanani. Aval Eved Ivri, a Jewish slave, now we're going to get to the daughter in a second, but even by a Jewish slave, we're at the second wide line. Remember, Dichtiv, it says, Ki tov lo imach, right? It's good for him. Eved, when he said, I didn't want to leave, said it was good for me with my owner. And we darshan that to mean, imach b'machal, imach b'mishtah. The Eved Ivri has to be with the owner, like, eat the same food, drink the same drink, right? We said the same bed, the same clothing, everything. So you can't say to your Eved Ivri, I'm not feeding you. You got to feed your Eved Ivri. Not only do you have to feed them, you got to feed them the same food you're eating. And kol shekain bito, certainly, this is interesting, certainly your child, you've got to feed your child like not less than an Eved Ivri. So you've got to give her whatever you're giving yourself. And so it's not the case, even if it's possible that by an Eved Kinani, you can keep the work and not feed them. By an Eved Ivri, you can't do that. And by a daughter, you certainly can't do that. And so if the Reisha, I'll read just the inside, sorry, that's the answer. So that's the question, right? So how could you have then said, that it's referring to a case where the father's not feeding the daughter, then why does it say that the father's patur? Why does it say that if somebody else injures her, the father keeps the shevet? Answers the Gemara, the father's not feeding her. And in fact is that he really does have to pay her the shevet. But the case of the Braita is Keda'amar Rava Breder of Ula, that lo nitzrucha, we only need the Braita to tell you, Ela lahadafa. We're talking about a case where there's extra, right? So that meaning what she needs to eat is only a small amount, but there's extra money that would be given for her earnings, right? So all she gets to keep, let's say it costs $10 a day to eat, and she could earn $30 a day. So even if the father is not feeding her, right, he still has a right to her money. He can't take the first $10 because she's got to buy food. But once she has enough money to buy food and there's extra money, a minor still has to give it to her father. So that's the case. And that's where we're saying, let's say she earned $30 a day. The father injured her, so she no longer can work, right? So she loses that $30 a day. The father doesn't have to pay her the extra, but he certainly has to pay her $10 a day so she can buy food, right? So the Braita didn't say that, but the Braita understood that he still has to feed her. He just can keep the extra money. Okay. Says the Gemara, fourth wide line now. B'mayu kimta lebatraita. Now the second Braita you said was now where smuchin al shulchano, right? Where the kids are still eating at the father's table, and therefore he keeps everything they earn, and therefore he's patur from paying them for shevet, and if they get damaged, he keeps it. Says Gemara, why does it say gdolim yitin lahem tanim yaselem skula? Why does it say that the father has to pay his kids? Amai. Why does the father have to pay his kids or pay his minors, put in a trust account? You should give it to the father. So why, if the father is feeding them, he should get their money? Amri says the Gemara, 1 second. The father doesn't really care. When we say that a father, right, wants his kids' earnings, that's only where he would be missing something. Meaning, let's say where the father injured them, right? So there, we say to the father, okay, pay your kid $20 a day. And he's like, no, I'm not paying them. I already feed them. But if somebody else injures them and that person has to pay $20 a day, the father doesn't want them. He could take the money, but he's not makbid because you're not asking him to pay, right? You're asking someone else to pay. When something comes from outside, the father says, okay, he injured my kid, let my kid keep the money. Says, okay, that's very generous of the father. But what about a mitzvah, right? The halacha is, we're going to have it soon in Bava mitzvah, but we know it already. If a kid finds a diamond ring, right? So the halacha is that if he's eating in his father's house, that goes to the father. Why does it go to the father? The father should be like, oh, happy for you. You found the diamond ring, right? Hamitzia, a lost object, dimi alma kaati, it wasn't the father's object, it was from the world. Lahu, v'kakapit, and we say that the father gets to keep it. So why does the father keep that, but the father doesn't keep injury? Amri says Gemara once, there's a little bit of a difference between finding a diamond ring and being punched in the face, right? If you get money from the outside, you find money, and you had no personal injury along the way, so then kapit, the father's going to say, okay, I'm feeding you, you're living in my house, I get it, right? But when you're talking about an injury, the italat sar de gufayo, right? Basically the kid suffered for this money. And it came from outside, meaning the father's not losing anything. There, lo kapid, the father does not generally be makbid, and he would not necessarily want to keep the money, and we let the kid keep it. But if the father himself injured the kid, he's not going to start paying up, and he doesn't have to, because since he's supporting the child, he gets all of their earnings. Asking, well, what about the final case? Hahatam, right? There was another case in the Braita, the first case, the itlate sara de gufa, the first case where we said the father was not supporting the child, right? And we said that the child the girl, right, was injured. And it comes from outside, and we said the father wants the money. He does get to keep it. The Ketani, as we said, lo od. Ella, we said at the end of the first Braita, afilo, I think we didn't say afilo, acherim shechavluba, if someone else damaged a girl, chayavin litain le'avia. So you have to give the father. Now, why would you give it to the father? Because again, this is a case where a girl is damaged by someone else, that other person is paying. The father is not supporting her, right? So we just said before that the father basically is generous about this and allows her to keep the money that she got from outside based on an injury. Answers the Gemara, Amri, that's a special case because Hatam, remember, we said that the first Breita was where the father was not supporting her, right? If the father's not supporting her, he's clearly not a very nice guy, right? He's a very cheapo. He's got an 8-year-old kid. He's not supporting them. So we know Gavra Kapdanahu. He's a very makbid. He's a very stingy person. The Ha'ain Somchin al Shulchano, right? Because obviously it's a case where he's not feeding his kids. Well, if that kind of person, he wants to get everything. He's greedy and he's not going to forgive anything. So that person, Afilo b'midi datadome alma kapid, that person, even something that comes from the outside, they're going to want to have their hands all over it. Al-hacha, but in this case, meaning the second case of the Breita, where the father is feeding his kids, he's a regular person who's normal, and the lav gavra kapdano, he's not a very strict or stingy person. He's feeding his kids even though they're 25 or 50. Kika kapid, so when he is makbid and says, I want the money, that's only if it's going to come from his own pocket. Something that would cause him money, meaning if he damaged the kids. But low kapid. It's something that comes from outside, he's not makbid. And that's why in the second Breita, we made a distinction between whether the father injured the kid, in which case the father does not have to pay because he's feeding the children. So the work is his. Or if somebody else injured them, where the money goes to the kid, even though it could go to the father is usually not makbid there because he says, look, they injured the kid. I didn't lose anything in the deal. Let them give the money to the kid. So ask the Gemara now, finally.
Have you made a distinction between the Gadola and the Katana? If the Gadola is not living with the father and she's working on her own, why would he be entitled to keep anything for her injury?
So the halacha is that if a child, even an adult child who is somech al shulchan aviv, who hasn't left the house and eats food only in the house of the father, whether it's a boy or a girl, the father gets to keep any earnings that kid makes.
But if she's not somechet al shulchano,
right? So if she's not, then if she's an adult, she gets to keep it.
Right.
The only
Okay.
case we said he gets to keep it is if she's a child. And if she's a child, it's only shevet, it's only the work. And as we said earlier, that's because it's hadafa. It's the extra above what she needs to eat. So basically, if he's not supporting her and she works, she gets to keep the minimum up to what she needs to eat. But anything she makes above that, she does have to give to her father. So a minor daughter, all of her earnings go to her father, except what she needs to eat if he's not feeding her. Says the Gemara now, 4 lines from the bottom. My skula. We said if it's a 6-year-old kid and you injure them, you got to give them $10,000. You don't give them a check. You make them it literally means like a monument, but obviously it's not what it means. It means something permanent, right? So what do we mean by that? Rav Chisda says Sefer Torah. Buy them a Sefer Torah, which is very valuable. They'll have it their whole life. They can sell it if they need to, but they can learn from it. It's something permanent. So don't let them buy candy. Buy something with eternal. Rabba Barafuna says, no, dikla. You can also, again, these are not exclusionary. Buy them a decal, buy them a palm tree. Because they're going to get dates for their whole life and it's going to grow. And so it's something that they can't basically waste. Continues the Gemara, let's just finish to the two dots on Amud Aleph. And Beishlakish agreed with what we said before, and he said, which was what Rav said, Lo zachta Torah la'av elo shevach nurin bilvad. The only things the father earns a right to for his minor daughter is the ability to marry her off or to sell her off as an Amma Ivriya, but not all the damage that's caused her. So the Nezek, Tsar, Ripoy, and Boshet goes to the daughter. Rabbi Yochanan says, I disagree. Rabbi Yochanan says, sorry, I don't disagree. Afilu pitzia, even if you cause a pitzia. Now, petza usually is a small wound, not a permanent wound, and not a wound that causes damage, right? You get like a bruise, like you punch her, right? So not that you should punch her, but like you get something that's essentially, it's like a superficial wound. Is how we usually think of a petza. So it says, Rabbi Yochanan, even a petza goes to the daughter. It says, 1 second. You really, who thought we were talking about a petza that would go to the father, I guess. Because I feel Rebbe Elazar, look at me by the question of Rebbe Elazar that started off today's daf was only Ela Chavala. The question was, can the father keep the money if she's wounded? Turn the page to daf Pechet Amud Aleph, or turn it over. To Avchata Mikaspa. Because now if he wants to sell her or he wants to marry her off, she's less valuable, right? But a wound, like a bruise, is not going to make her less valuable. Of a pitziyah, a pitziyah, which doesn't make her less valuable. Look at me, boiling. No one had a question about whether the father should get that. Father, of course, doesn't get that. Rabbi Yossi bar Chabnina. No, it's talking about shepatza bifaneha. He didn't cause a damage, but he did wound her on her face, right? So she's got a big bruise now on her cheek, and that's afcheta mikaspa, and that in fact does make people less likely to want to purchase her, to have less money, and therefore there is a decrease in value. And you would have thought that maybe it goes to the father. And says Rabbi Yochanan, like Reish Lakish, I disagree. Everyone agrees, basically everyone's agreeing that it doesn't go to the father, it goes to her. And the only thing that goes to the father is his ability to marry her off and keep the kesef kiddushin, or his ability to sell her as an amma ivriya, a female slave. We'll stop there, and we'll get into tomorrow's stuff, which I think David is doing. He's going to talk all about avadim, which is very interesting, and how we look at Eved Knani and Eved Ivri and go from there. Shavua Tov again.
Shavua Tov, good night.
Good night,
Thank you.
everyone.
Shavua
You're
Tov.
welcome.